Las Vegas, 1962. The Sands Hotel Casino was packed with high rollers, celebrities, and some of the most dangerous men in America. At a private table in the back sat Vincent, the Chin Romano, a Chicago crime boss who controlled half the illegal operations in the Midwest. He was loud, drunk, and feeling untouchable. Dean Martin walked past the table on his way to the stage. He was about to perform his midnight show, wearing his trademark tuxedo, looking effortlessly cool as always. Vincent called out to him, making a crude joke. The entire table laughed. But Vincent didn't stop there. He made another comment, this time about Dean's mother. About her being an immigrant. About her not speaking proper English. About Italian women being good for only one thing. The casino went silent. Everyone who heard it knew Vincent had just crossed a line that should never be crossed. Dean Martin stopped walking, turned around slowly, and what he said next, in his calm, measured voice, made a feared crime boss realize he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. No shouting, no threats, no violence, just words so cold, so powerful, that Vincent Romano would never speak Dean Martin's name again without respect. Before we reveal what Dean said, hit that like button and subscribe. This is a story about respect, dignity, and what happens when you disrespect a man who grew up on the same streets you did. Comment below if you're a Dean Martin fan. ***. Dean Martin's real story. Most people knew Dean Martin as the cool crooner. The laid-back member of the Rat Pack who made everything look effortless. The guy who seemed like he was always half-drunk and didn't have a care in the world. But that was an act. A carefully crafted persona that hid the real man underneath. Dean Martin was born Dino Paul Crocetti in 1917 in Steubenville, Ohio. His parents were Italian immigrants. His father Gaetano was a barber. His mother Angela worked from home making alterations to clothing. They were poor, working-class people who'd come to America looking for a better life. Steubenville wasn't some glamorous city. It was a steel town. Rough, industrial, filled with factory workers and mob connections. The same families who controlled Chicago and New York had operations running through Steubenville. Young Dino grew up seeing both sides of Italian-American life. The hardworking immigrants trying to build honest lives, and the gangsters who used intimidation and violence to get what they wanted. Dean didn't speak English until he was 5 years old. At home, his parents spoke only Italian. When he started school, the other kids mocked his accent, called him names, made him feel ashamed of where he came from. He dropped out of high school in 10th grade, not because he was stupid, but because he was tired of being treated like an outsider. He worked a dozen different jobs. Dealt cards in illegal gambling houses. Worked at a steel mill. Boxed professionally for a while. He had several matches and wasn't bad at it. The boxing gave him a broken nose that he'd carry for the rest of his life, and more importantly, it taught him something crucial. How to take a punch and how to throw one. But Dean's real gift was singing. He'd perform at local clubs, slowly building a reputation. He changed his name from Dino Crocetti to Dean Martin because in 1940s America, Italian names were associated with gangsters and poverty. He wanted to be accepted, to be seen as American, not just as another immigrant's kid. The mother he never forgot. Through all of this, the name change, the fame, the transformation into a Hollywood star, Dean never forgot his mother. Angela Crocetti was the most important person in his life. She was tough, strong, and fiercely protective of her children. She'd worked herself to exhaustion to make sure her kids had food and clothes. Dean would later tell his children, "Your grandmother came to this country with nothing. Couldn't speak the language. People treated her like dirt because she was an immigrant. But she never complained. She just worked harder than everyone else and made sure we had opportunities she never had." Even after Dean became a millionaire, even after he was performing for presidents and dating movie stars, he called his mother every Sunday. Without fail. When he was in town, he'd visit her. Bring her gifts. Make sure she was taken care of. His brothers and sisters would later say that Dean sent money home for years, making sure his parents never had to worry about bills or medical expenses. Angela Crocetti passed away in 1966, but in 1962, she was still alive. Still living in Ohio. Still speaking with a heavy Italian accent after 40 years in America. And Dean still called her every single Sunday, no matter where he was in the world. The Vegas connection. Las Vegas in the early 1960s wasn't like it is today. The casinos weren't run by corporations. They were controlled by the mob. Chicago, New York, Kansas City crime families all had pieces of Vegas. The Sands Hotel, where Dean and the Rat Pack performed, was partially owned by mob-connected investors. This created a complicated relationship. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. They knew who really owned the casinos where they performed. They'd grown up around these men. Frank had connections going back to his early days in New Jersey. Dean had seen mob guys in Steubenville his whole childhood. But there was an understanding, an unspoken code. The entertainers didn't ask questions about the business side of things. The mob guys didn't interfere with the performances. Everyone made money. Everyone was happy. Most importantly, there was mutual respect. The gangsters respected the entertainers because they brought in customers and gave Vegas legitimacy. The entertainers respected the gangsters' power but weren't afraid of them. They'd come from the same neighborhoods, knew the same type of people, understood the culture. This respect meant certain things were off limits. You didn't threaten an entertainer. You didn't disrespect them publicly. And you absolutely never, ever, disrespected someone's mother. In Italian-American culture, particularly among men who grew up in that world, your mother was sacred. More sacred than religion, more sacred than money, more sacred than anything. Vincent the Chin Romano. Vincent Romano wasn't used to boundaries. At 52 years old, he controlled gambling, loan sharking, and various other operations throughout Chicago and the Midwest. He was known for being crude, aggressive, and believing that his money and power meant he could say anything to anyone. He'd come to Vegas with his crew, 5 guys who did whatever Vincent told them to do. They'd been drinking since the afternoon, gambling with money that seemed endless, treating the casino staff like servants. Vincent was loud and obnoxious, the kind of guy who thought being feared was the same as being respected. He'd seen the Rat Pack perform before. Thought they were entertaining, but also thought they were soft. These Hollywood types, he'd say to his crew, they wouldn't last 5 minutes on the real streets. They play gangsters in movies, but they don't know what real power is. Vincent had a particular disdain for Dean Martin. He thought Dean's laid-back persona was weakness. Thought the whole cool, effortless thing was just an act to hide the fact that Dean was soft. He didn't know, or didn't care, about Dean's real background. Didn't know about the boxing, the rough childhood, the Steeltown roots. To Vincent, Dean Martin was just another pretty boy singer who'd gotten lucky. That was his first mistake. His second mistake would happen at the private table that night. The first comment. Dean Martin had just finished having dinner with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. They were getting ready for their midnight show. The legendary Rat Pack performances that had become the hottest ticket in Vegas. Dean was walking through the casino, greeting people, being his usual charming self. He passed Vincent's table. The crime boss had a stack of chips in front of him, a drink in his hand, and that aggressive confidence that comes from being drunk and powerful. "Hey, Dean," Vincent called out. "Come over here for a second." Dean knew who Vincent was. Everyone did. But Dean also wasn't the type to ignore people, even people he didn't particularly like. He walked over to the table, smiling his easy smile. "Evening, gentlemen. How's the luck treating you?" "Can't complain," Vincent said. "Though I gotta say, Dean, you look more relaxed than any man I've ever seen. You always this cool, or is it just an act?" The table laughed. It wasn't an aggressive question, not yet. Just the kind of needling that guys like Vincent did to everyone, testing boundaries. "No act," Dean replied smoothly. "Life's too short to be tense all the time. You should try it sometime, Vincent." More laughter. Vincent's crew was enjoying this exchange. But Vincent didn't like being the subject of the joke, even a gentle one. His smile hardened slightly. "You know what I think?" Vincent said, his voice getting louder. "I think you Hollywood guys have it easy. You sing a few songs, make some movies, and everyone treats you like royalty. Back in Chicago, you'd be nothing." Dean's smile didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Well, good thing I'm in Vegas then, isn't it?" He started to turn away, ready to head to the stage. That's when Vincent made his big mistake. The insult. "Hey, Dean, wait a second," Vincent called out. "I got a question for you. Your real name's Crocetti, right?" "That's what I heard. You changed it because Crocetti sounded too Italian." Dean stopped. Turned back. "That's right. Dino Crocetti. Changed it to Dean Martin when I started performing." "Why?" Vincent pressed. "You ashamed of being Italian?" The table had gone quiet now. Vincent's crew sensed he was building up to something. Other people in the nearby area were starting to pay attention. "Not ashamed," Dean said carefully. "Just practical. It was easier to get bookings with an American-sounding name. You know how it was back then? Yeah, I know how it was, Vincent said, his voice dripping with contempt. People like your mother couldn't speak English right. Came over from the old country and never really fit in. I bet she still talks like she just got off the boat, doesn't she? The entire section of the casino went dead silent. Dealers stopped dealing. Waitresses froze. The few people who'd been walking by stopped in their tracks. Dean Martin's face didn't change expression. He still had that same easy smile. But anyone who knew him well, and Frank Sinatra, watching from across the casino, knew him very well, could see the change. Dean's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes went cold. What did you just say? Dean asked quietly. Vincent, too drunk and too arrogant to realize the danger he was in, laughed. I'm just saying, Dean, some of these immigrant women, your mother, my mother, all of them, they come over here and they never really become American, you know? They're always going to be foreigners. Hell, I bet your mother still cooks with garlic in everything and talks with her hands like she's directing traffic. His crew laughed nervously. They were starting to realize Vincent had gone too far, but they weren't about to contradict him. Vincent continued, emboldened by the laughter. These old Italian women, Dean, they're good for cooking and having kids, and that's about it. Can't have a real conversation with them, because they barely speak English. I bet when you bring her out to your fancy Hollywood parties, you have to translate everything for her. The line that should never be crossed. Dean Martin raised his hand, a simple gesture. Vincent stopped talking. The silence in the casino was now absolute. You could hear the slot machines from across the room, but not a single human voice. Stand up, Dean said softly. Vincent blinked, confused. What? I said stand up. Dean's voice was still quiet, still calm, but there was something in it that made Vincent's survival instincts kick in. For the first time, Vincent felt a flutter of nervousness. Dean, I was just... Stand. Up. Each word was pronounced clearly, without emotion, but with absolute authority. Vincent stood. His crew stood with him, their hands moving toward their jackets where weapons were presumably hidden. But Dean didn't even look at them. His eyes were locked on Vincent. Frank Sinatra had made his way over, standing a few feet behind Dean. Sammy Davis Jr. was there too. They weren't coming to fight, they were coming to witness whatever was about to happen. Dean stepped closer to Vincent, close enough that only Vincent and the people immediately around them could hear his next words clearly. But in the absolute silence of the casino, his voice carried further than he probably intended. The calm before the storm. Vincent, Dean began, his voice so calm it was almost conversational. I'm going to explain something to you, and I want you to listen very carefully. Vincent nodded, suddenly very sober. My mother's name is Angela. Angela Crocetti. She came to this country when she was 17 years old. Came through Ellis Island with nothing but a suitcase and dreams about giving her future children a better life than she had in Italy. Dean paused, letting that sink in. She couldn't speak English. You're right about that. So you know what she did? She worked 12 hours a day doing alterations, sewing clothes for people, making pennies. And at night, she'd try to learn English from a dictionary she bought for a nickel at a used bookstore. She'd sit at the kitchen table after we went to bed, practicing words, trying to lose her accent so her kids wouldn't be ashamed of her. Vincent's face had gone pale. He tried to speak, but Dean held up his hand again. Let me finish. She married my father, who worked as a barber. They lived in a tiny apartment in Steubenville, poorest part of town. When I was born, she was so happy she cried for 3 days straight. She wanted me to have everything she never had. Education, opportunities, a chance to be something. Dean's voice remained calm, but his eyes were burning now. I dropped out of school in 10th grade. You know why? Because kids like you, kids whose parents had been here longer, who spoke better English, who thought they were better than us, they made my life hell. Called me names. Mocked my mother's accent when she came to school. Made her feel ashamed for not being American enough. The words that changed everything. Dean took another step closer to Vincent. Now they were inches apart. Dean was slightly shorter, but somehow he seemed to tower over the crime boss. My mother, Dean continued, his voice getting quieter but somehow more intense, worked herself sick to put food on our table. She took care of 5 children. She nursed my father when he got pneumonia and almost died. She held our family together through the Depression when we had nothing. And through all of that, she never complained. Not once. She just worked harder and prayed that her children would have better lives. Vincent tried to speak. Dean, I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Dean cut him off. You meant every word. You thought you could disrespect my mother because you're Vincent Romano. Because you're connected. Because you've got money and power and 5 guys with guns standing behind you. Dean glanced at Vincent's crew with contempt. You think I'm scared of your guys, Vincent? I grew up in Steubenville. I know exactly what you are and what they are. I boxed professionally. I worked in gambling houses that made your Chicago operations look like church bingo. The difference between you and me isn't that you're tougher. It's that I chose a different path. The crowd around them had grown. Word had spread through the casino that something major was happening. Pit bosses had stopped working. High rollers had left their tables. Even some of the showgirls had come out to watch. The revelation. You want to know why I changed my name from Crocetti to Martin? Dean asked. It wasn't because I was ashamed. It was because I was smart. In 1940, if you wanted to make it in entertainment, you couldn't do it with a name that sounded too Italian. The club owners wouldn't book you. The record labels wouldn't sign you. That's just how it was. He paused. But every Sunday, Vincent, every single Sunday, no matter where I am in the world, I call my mother. And you know what I call her? Mama. Not mother. Not mom. Mama. In Italian. Because I never forgot where I came from or who gave me everything I have. Dean's voice got even quieter, forcing everyone to strain to hear him. And when I call her, you know what we talk about? We talk about family. About respect. About dignity. About how a real man treats people, especially women, especially his elders, especially his mother. Vincent was sweating now. His crew had backed up a step, realizing that whatever Dean Martin was, he wasn't the soft Hollywood singer they'd thought he was. The ultimatum. So here's what's going to happen, Vincent, Dean said, and now his voice had the quality of steel wrapped in silk. You're going to apologize. Not to me. To everyone in this casino who had to hear you disrespect a woman who's 1,000 times better than you'll ever be. Dean, come on. You're going to apologize, Dean continued as if Vincent hadn't spoken. Or I'm going to make 2 phone calls. The first one is to my mother. I'm going to tell her that a man named Vincent Romano from Chicago said some very disrespectful things about her. And then she's going to call her sister. And her sister is going to call her sons. And Vincent, do you know who my mother's sister married? Vincent's face went white. He knew where this was going. That's right, Dean said with a cold smile. She married into the Lombardo family. You know them? Sure you do. They run most of southern Chicago. The part you don't control. And I promise you, Vincent, when they hear that you disrespected their aunt, your connections won't mean a damn thing. This was the trump card. Dean had never played it before, never used his family connections as leverage. He didn't need to. His talent and reputation were enough. But Vincent had forced his hand by disrespecting his mother. The second call. That's the first call, Dean continued. The second call is even simpler. I call Frank over there. He gestured to Frank Sinatra, who was watching with his arms crossed. And Frank calls his friends in New York. And you know what Frank's friends in New York do when they hear that a Chicago boss came to their town and disrespected their friends? Vincent was trembling now. He'd miscalculated badly. He'd thought Dean Martin was just an entertainer, someone who could be pushed around. He hadn't realized that Dean came from the same world he did, had the same connections, understood the same code, and had chosen not to use those connections until someone crossed the ultimate line. Or, Dean said, his voice suddenly lighter, almost cheerful, you can apologize right now. Tell everyone here that you made a mistake, that you had too much to drink and said things you didn't mean. And then you can leave this casino, leave Vegas, and go back to Chicago. And we'll forget this ever happened. The choice was clear. Vincent could maintain his pride and face consequences from multiple crime families, or he could swallow his ego and walk away. The apology. Vincent Romano was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He understood power dynamics, and right now Dean Martin held all the power. Not because of physical strength or weapons, but because of respect, connections, and the unbreakable code about mothers. I apologize, Vincent said, his voice barely audible. Louder, Dean said calmly. So everyone can hear. Vincent cleared his throat. His face was red with humiliation, but his voice was clear. I apologize. I had too much to drink. I said things I shouldn't have said about Mrs. Crocetti. It was disrespectful and wrong. I'm sorry. Dean nodded. Good. Now apologize to everyone here who had to witness it. Vincent turned to the crowd. I apologize to everyone here. My behavior was unacceptable. Dean studied him for a moment, then stepped back. Apology accepted. Now get out of my casino. Your casino? Vincent said, a flash of his old arrogance returning. This isn't your. Yes, it is, Frank Sinatra called out from behind Dean. When Dean's on that stage, this whole place is his. And right now, he's telling you to leave. So leave. Vincent and his crew gathered their chips and left. They walked through the silent casino, past hundreds of people who watched them go. It was the walk of shame, and everyone knew it. A powerful crime boss had been humbled by a singer, and the whole world had seen it. The aftermath. When Vincent and his crew were gone, the casino slowly came back to life. Dealers returned to their tables. Conversations resumed. But everyone was talking about what they'd just witnessed. Dean Martin straightened his bow tie and smiled at the crowd. Well, that was more excitement than I planned for before the show. How about we get some music going? The crowd erupted in applause. Not just because of what he'd said to Vincent, but because of how he'd said it. With dignity. With controlled power. With respect for his mother and for himself. Frank Sinatra clapped Dean on the shoulder as they walked toward the stage. That was something, Paul. I've never seen you like that. I don't like being like that, Dean admitted. But nobody talks about my mother. Nobody. He learned that lesson, Sammy Davis Jr. added. The whole casino learned that lesson. That night's performance was electric. The Rat Pack was at their best, and Dean seemed to have an extra spark. The audience gave them 3 standing ovations. People later said it was one of the greatest shows they'd ever seen. The word spreads. By morning, the story had spread throughout Las Vegas and beyond. The entertainment community heard about it first. How Dean Martin had faced down a Chicago crime boss and won without throwing a single punch. Then the mob community heard about it, and the reaction was mixed. Some gangsters thought Vincent had gotten what he deserved. You don't talk about a man's mother, one New York capo reportedly said. That's basic respect. Vincent forgot that, and Dean reminded him. Others thought Dean had overstepped, that entertainers shouldn't challenge men like Vincent. But those voices were in the minority. The code about mothers was universal, and Vincent had violated it. Vincent Romano himself never spoke about the incident publicly. He went back to Chicago and continued his operations, but his reputation had taken a hit. People knew he'd been humbled by a singer, and in that world, reputation was everything. More importantly, Vincent never disrespected Dean Martin again. And according to several sources, he actually sent a private apology letter to Angela Crocetti a few weeks later. It was his way of trying to make things right, of acknowledging that he'd crossed a line that should never be crossed. The real lesson about power. What Dean Martin did that night teaches us something profound about power. Real power isn't about who can hurt who. It's not about money or weapons or how many people are afraid of you. Real power comes from respect, from principles, from knowing your worth and standing up for what matters. Vincent Romano had all the traditional trappings of power. He controlled illegal operations worth millions. He had men who would kill for him. He thought that made him untouchable. But when he disrespected Dean's mother, all of that power meant nothing. Dean's power came from different sources. His talent, yes, but also his roots, his connections, his understanding of the culture he came from. He knew the code. He knew that in Italian-American culture, a man's mother is sacred. By defending his mother with calm words instead of violence, Dean showed a kind of strength that Vincent couldn't comprehend. The lesson about roots. Dean Martin never forgot where he came from. Even at the height of his fame, even when he was one of the biggest stars in the world, he remembered being Dino Crocetti from Steubenville. He remembered his mother's sacrifices, his father's hard work, the poverty and struggle of his childhood. That's why the insult hit so hard. Vincent wasn't just insulting Angela Crocetti. He was insulting every immigrant mother who'd come to America looking for a better life. Every woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion for her children. Every person who'd been made to feel ashamed for their accent or their heritage. Dean's response wasn't just about defending his mother, though that was certainly the primary motivation. It was about defending the dignity of everyone who'd been disrespected for being an immigrant, for being different, for not fitting in. In our modern world, where people often try to hide their backgrounds or distance themselves from their roots to fit in, Dean Martin's story is a powerful reminder. Your heritage is something to be proud of, not ashamed of. The people who sacrificed for you deserve respect and honor, especially your mother. The lesson about respect. Vincent Romano learned something that night that he should have already known. Respect is earned through actions, not demanded through intimidation. He thought his position as a crime boss meant he could say anything to anyone. He learned that some lines should never be crossed, regardless of how powerful you think you are. Dean Martin earned more respect in those few minutes than Vincent had earned in his entire career. Not because Dean was tougher or more violent, but because he showed principle. He showed that some things matter more than keeping the peace or avoiding confrontation. Family matters. Dignity matters. Respect matters. The people in that casino that night witnessed something rare. A man standing up for what he believed in, using nothing but his words and his presence. No weapons. No threats of violence. Just calm, controlled power backed by absolute conviction. What this means for us today. We live in a world where disrespect has become common. People say terrible things online, hiding behind screens. They insult others' families, backgrounds, and beliefs without thinking about the consequences. We've lost the sense that some things are sacred, that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. Dean Martin's story reminds us that we should stand up when those boundaries are crossed. Not with violence or aggression, but with dignity and strength. When someone disrespects your family, your heritage, or your values, you have every right to defend them. And you can do it in a way that shows strength rather than weakness. It also reminds us to be careful about what we say. Vincent Romano thought he was being funny, that his status protected him from consequences. He learned that words have power, and disrespect always has a price. Before you insult someone, before you mock their family or their background, remember that you might be dealing with someone like Dean Martin, someone who appears easygoing but has steel underneath. The final truth. Dean Martin passed away in 1995, 33 years after this incident. In all those years, he rarely spoke about what happened that night at the Sands. He didn't need to. The people who were there told the story. It became part of Vegas legend, part of Rat Pack history, part of Dean's legacy. But what mattered most to Dean wasn't the respect he earned from standing up to Vincent Romano. What mattered was that he defended his mother's honor. Angela Crocetti never knew the full story. Dean never told her about the incident because he didn't want to upset her. But he knew. He knew he'd done the right thing. When Angela passed away in 1966, Dean was devastated. Frank Sinatra later said, "I'd never seen Dean cry before his mother's funeral. He loved her more than anything in the world. She was his hero." At the funeral, Dean said something that everyone remembered. "My mother taught me that dignity and hard work were the only things that really mattered. She taught me to respect others and to demand respect in return. Everything good I ever did, I did because she showed me how." That was the real lesson of the night Dean Martin faced down Vincent Romano. It wasn't about pride or ego or proving who was tougher. It was about honoring the woman who gave him everything, who sacrificed everything so he could become Dean Martin. If this story touched you, if you understand what it means to honor your mother and stand up for family, smash that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message about respect and dignity. Comment below. What would you have done in Dean's position? Remember, real power doesn't come from intimidation or violence. It comes from principles, from knowing what matters, and from having the courage to defend it. Dean Martin showed us that the coolest thing you can do is stand up for the people you love with dignity and strength. The world needs more people like Dean Martin. People who remember where they came from, who honor their parents' sacrifices, and who won't let anyone disrespect the people they love. Be that person. Stand up with dignity. Make your mother proud. Rest in peace, Dean Martin. And rest in peace, Angela Crocetti. Your son made you proud that night, and he made us all understand what it means to be a real man.